This video is about the worst games ever made. Not just the famously bad ones, but the broken, forgotten, and often weird. We're going to work our way down the iceberg, starting with the games that most of you will know, and then dive deeper into the obscure. In 1982, Atari rushed E.T. the Extraterrestrial to market in just over 5 weeks to meet the Christmas season. The result was a confusing, almost unplayable game that left many players wondering what they were supposed to do. The game involves controlling E.T. as he wanders through a looping maze of near-identical screens, collecting pieces of a phone to call home. The map is filled with pits that E.T. constantly falls into, and climbing out is slow and tedious. The game lacks any real instruction or intuitive design, leaving players to rely on trial and error. Despite the gameplay flaws, Atari manufactured over 4 million cartridges, expecting the game to be a massive hit. Only about 1.5 million were sold, with hundreds of thousands returned by frustrated customers. The unsold cartridges, along with other excess inventory, were buried in a New Mexico landfill. The failure of E.T. contributed to massive financial losses for Atari during the video game crash of 1983. Released in 2003 by Stellar Stone, Big Rigs was intended to be a semi-legal street racing game where you control a big rig truck in head-to-head races. In reality, it shipped as a completely unfinished product. The opponent AI doesn't function. Your rival's truck never moves, meaning you win every race by default. There's no collision detection, so players can drive through buildings, bridges, and hills. You can reverse infinitely with no speed cap, causing your truck to accelerate to absurd velocities with zero resistance or physics. The game has 5 racetracks, but one of them crashes the program when selected. Basic gameplay elements like boundaries, gravity, and working checkpoints are either broken or just missing. Even the victory screen is tainted with the now infamous "Your Winner" line. Big Rigs was released and sold at retail despite being fundamentally unplayable and unfinished, marking it as one of the most glaring examples of non-existent quality control in gaming. Developed by Titus Interactive and released on the Nintendo 64, Superman 64 puts players in a virtual version of Metropolis created by Lex Luthor. The main gameplay loop involves flying through floating rings under strict time limits, a task made nearly impossible by slippery controls, an unpredictable camera, and frequent input lag. The game's environments are foggy and barren, filled with repetitive textures and minimal interactivity, a limitation partially blamed on hardware, but also on rushed development. When not flying, players engage in awkward combat with minimal feedback and poorly designed mission objectives like carrying civilians or disarming bombs, tasks often bugged or prone to fail. Superman's powers, like freeze breath and heat vision, are available only through temporary pickups, and even then, they're unreliable to use. The game frequently crashes, loads slowly, and lacks any form of save system beyond password checkpoints. Despite being critically panned, Superman 64 sold over 500,000 copies, likely due to the strength of the brand, but it remains infamous for offering almost no functioning gameplay loop, making it one of the most broken and frustrating games ever released. Originally conceived as an open-world biker game set in the 1960s, Ride to Hell: Retribution was released as a linear third-person action game after years of troubled development and heavy cuts. The final product was filled with bugs, clunky mechanics, and one of the most tone-deaf narratives in gaming.
Hello? I don't ever recall seeing a woman fixing a truck before.
Combat is limited to shallow, repetitive melee attacks and poorly animated gunplay. Enemy AI is barely functional, often freezing or walking into walls. Driving segments, which were meant to be the major feature, feel floaty and awkward with stiff controls and repetitive sound loops. The game is also notorious for its bizarre handling of sex scenes. Multiple sequences show fully clothed characters grinding against each other in stiff, unblinking animations, accompanied by awkward guitar riffs and no dialogue. Originally announced in 2008, the game spent years in development limbo before being rushed to release in 2013. It was delisted from many digital storefronts due to overwhelmingly negative feedback, and no official sales figures were published. Published by Sega and developed by Gearbox Software, Aliens: Colonial Marines was marketed as a canonical first-person shooter set in the Aliens universe, but the final product was riddled with bugs, downgraded visuals, and broken AI. The campaign places players in the boots of a colonial marine sent to investigate LV-426, but the gameplay is sluggish, hit detection is inconsistent, and the level design feels outdated. Enemy xenomorphs frequently run in circles or get stuck in walls due to the faulty AI pathfinding, later traced to a single typo in the game's code. The visuals seen in trailers and early demos were significantly better than what appeared in the final release, leading to accusations of false advertising. Textures were muddy, lightning was flat, and the character animations appeared stiff and robotic. Despite this, the game shipped over 1.3 million copies, benefiting from the strength of the Alien franchise and early pre-orders. After release, a class action lawsuit was filed against Sega and Gearbox for misleading marketing, but it was later dismissed. Aliens: Colonial Marines is remembered less for its premise and more for how its unpolished execution turned a beloved IP into one of the biggest letdowns in gaming. After more than 14 years in development, Duke Nukem Forever finally released in 2011, and it immediately showed its age. Originally announced in 1997, the game went through multiple engine changes, developer shakeups, and direction rewrites before being completed by Gearbox Software. Gameplay consists of standard first-person shooting with linear levels, but modern FPS mechanics were awkwardly forced into the old-school formula. You're limited to carrying 2 weapons at a time. Interactivity, a big part of the Duke Nukem 3D experience, is still present, but mostly reduced to novelty objects like urinals and whiteboards. Combat feels sluggish, enemy AI is basic, and scripted events often break mid-sequence. Levels are padded with bland driving sections, turret segments, and tedious switch hunting. Boss battles lack strategy and frequently recycle patterns. Graphically, the game was outdated, even at launch. Textures are muddy, animations are stiff, and loading times were notoriously long, sometimes over 40 seconds between sections. Despite the backlash, Duke Nukem Forever debuted at number 2 in the US sales charts in its first week, but suffered a massive drop in sales shortly after due to the overwhelmingly negative reviews and word of mouth. Developed by Balan Company and published by Square Enix, Balan Wonderworld was meant to be a grand return for director Yuji Naka, co-creator of Sonic the Hedgehog. What players received was a baffling, poorly designed 3D platformer filled with structural and mechanical issues. The game features over 80 different costumes, each with its own ability, but the catch is that each costume is limited to a single action, and every face button on the controller performs the same move. Many costumes even disable your ability to jump, which is a core action in any platformer. You can only hold 3 costumes at a time, and swapping between them mid-level is clunky and unintuitive, a system which had already been figured out when Majora's Mask came out in 2000. Level design is repetitive, with slow pacing, minimal challenge, and constant backtracking. The game's visuals are colorful but cluttered, and its cutscenes are mostly without text and confusing. The final boss battle shipped with a bug that could trigger seizure-inducing flashing lights, which had to be patched post-launch. The game received overwhelmingly negative reviews and sold fewer than 2,100 copies in its first week in Japan. Shortly after release, Yuji Naka left Square Enix and later revealed that he had been removed from the project 6 months before launch, which he later sued the company over. Developed by BioWare and published by Electronic Arts, Anthem was positioned as a sci-fi looter shooter meant to rival Destiny. Players took control of customizable exosuits called Javelins and explored a shared open world, fighting alien creatures and collecting loot. At launch, the game was riddled with technical and design issues. Combat felt decent in short bursts, but the mission structure was repetitive, often involving wave-based enemy encounters with little variation. Load times were notoriously long, sometimes requiring a full reload just to enter a building, and the hub world was a clunky, first-person space that broke immersion and slowed down gameplay pacing. Progression was hindered by inconsistent loot drops, clunky menus, and the confusing AI. Multiplayer matchmaking was inconsistent, and solo play was poorly balanced. The game also lacked meaningful endgame content, which caused players to burn out quickly after reaching max level. Despite a big marketing push, the game fell flat critically. It reportedly sold around 5 million copies, but interest plummeted soon after launch. BioWare planned a full overhaul dubbed Anthem Next, but the project was officially cancelled in 2021, just 2 years later. Released in 2006 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, Sonic the Hedgehog, often referred to as Sonic 06, was meant to reboot the franchise with a dramatic story and new gameplay elements. Instead, it launched in an unfinished state riddled with bugs. The game features 3 main characters, Sonic, Shadow, and newcomer Silver, each with their own storyline. Sonic's sections emphasize high-speed platforming, but are frequently interrupted by poor physics, jarring camera shifts, and broken collision detection. Shadow's gameplay adds clunky vehicle segments, while Silver's telekinesis powers are awkward to control. Load times are hilariously long, with some missions triggering multiple back-to-back loads for a single conversation or cutscene. Glitches are common. Characters clip through floors, and scripted events fail to trigger. The game's development was split when Sonic Team was forced to focus on creating a separate title for the Nintendo Wii, reducing the team and timeline for Sonic 06. Despite its issues, it was rushed to meet the holiday season and sold approximately 870,000 copies in its first year, largely on brand recognition alone. At launch, No Man's Sky promised a procedurally generated universe with over 18 quintillion planets, seamless exploration, and multiplayer interactions. What players actually received was a barren, repetitive experience lacking many of the advertised features. Each planet featured similar terrain and creatures with minimal interactivity. Exploration quickly became tedious, as most locations recycled assets and behavior patterns. Core gameplay revolved around collecting resources, upgrading your gear, and warping to the next solar system, but the systems were shallow and grind-heavy. Multiplayer, a heavily marketed feature, was non-existent at launch, despite the game's box implying it was supported. Players discovered this immediately when they attempted to meet in-game and couldn't see each other. Space combat was simplistic, and AI behavior was either too aggressive or non-existent. Despite the controversy, the game sold over 3 million copies within the first few months, bolstered by pre-orders and heavy marketing. criticism was intense, with refund demands spiking and regulatory bodies investigating the game's promotional materials. Many of the missing features would be added years later through updates, but the launch version of No Man's Sky became infamous for drastically under-delivering on its promises. Cyberpunk 2077 launched in December 2020 after years of hype, trailers, and delays. While the PC version was mostly playable, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions were plagued by severe bugs, performance issues, and downgrades. On base consoles, frame rates often dropped below 20 frames per second, textures failed to load properly, and characters or vehicles frequently clipped through the environment. NPCs would disappear or spawn halfway through floors, and enemy AI either failed to react or behaved erratically. Some players reported over 50 hard crashes across a single playthrough. Combat, though ambitious, was hampered by input lag and unpredictable hitboxes. Critical path quests could break permanently, forcing players to restart hours of progress. Sony pulled the game from the PlayStation Store just 1 week after launch, an unprecedented move, and both CD Projekt Red and Sony began offering full refunds. Despite this, Cyberpunk 2077 sold over 13 million copies in its first 10 days, mostly due to pre-orders. The game's poor performance on last-gen hardware led to a long roadmap of patches and updates, but its console launch date remains one of the most botched in gaming history. Postal 3 was developed primarily by Russian studio Akela, with limited involvement from Running with Scissors, the original creators of the Postal series. Released for PC in 2011, it abandoned the open-world sandbox chaos of Postal 2 in favor of a linear third-person shooter format. Gameplay is plagued by poor hit detection and constant crashes. Enemy behavior is erratic, pathfinding is inconsistent, and controls often fail to respond properly. Some missions are so bug-ridden that they become impossible to complete without restarts or console commands. The game features a moral path system, but it has little impact beyond which cutscenes you see. Many of the shock elements, a hallmark of the Postal series, feel forced and juvenile here, lacking any sense of satire or commentary. Though it was released at a budget price, Postal 3 received overwhelmingly negative reviews. Running with Scissors later disowned the game entirely, removed it from sale, and encouraged fans to avoid it. Released for the GameCube and Xbox, Aquaman: Battle for Atlantis attempted to ride the wave of comic book popularity, but quickly sank due to poor design and broken mechanics. The game drops players into underwater combat missions across a series of repetitive, dull environments. Combat is limited to slow punch-and-kick combos with little visual or mechanical feedback. Most missions involve fighting the same enemy models repeatedly while navigating sparse, textureless underwater corridors. The swimming controls are sluggish and disorienting, made worse by an inconsistent camera that often clips through geometry or gets stuck. There is no minimap or clear guidance on where to go next. Despite using a major DC Comics property, the game featured no voice acting, minimal music, and basic cutscenes made of static character portraits and text. Review scores were overwhelmingly negative, and it failed to chart in major sales lists. Developed by Idle FX and released for the original Xbox, Drake of the 99 Dragons was intended to kick off a multimedia franchise, but the game's design flaws made that dream dead on arrival. You play as Drake, an undead assassin seeking revenge. The game attempts to blend third-person shooting with acrobatic movement, but the execution is broken at every level. The twin-stick aiming is sluggish and imprecise, and auto-targeting frequently locks onto the wrong enemies or fails entirely. Combat often devolves into blind firing while spinning in circles due to an uncooperative camera. Levels are filled with dead ends, awkward platforming segments, and unclear objectives. The visuals are washed out with stiff animations and generic enemy designs. Cutscenes are out of sync, and voice acting is either mumbled or wildly overacted.
You can rest here. Behold, the master of the 99 dragons.
Yes, we see the body, but not his soul.
I'll bring back his soul, but first I'll take care of Tang.
The game can be completed in under 2 hours, with little variation in gameplay or level structure. It's well known as one of the worst games on Xbox, and it later received a low-effort re-release on Steam that preserved all its issues.
With the slightest trace of the vanished monuments.
Good morning, Angels.
Good morning, Charlie.
As you've seen, the head of the FBI is at a loss. The president himself has requested our help, Bosley.
Released for PS2 and GameCube, Charlie's Angels was a beat-em-up tie-in based on the early 2000s movie franchise. Despite the popularity of the IP, the game launched with minimal features, weak visuals, and a total lack of polish. Players controlled the three angels, Dylan, Natalie, and Alex, across a series of generic levels. The core gameplay consists of hand-to-hand combat against waves of identical enemies using stiff punch and kick combos. There's no variation in moves, no upgrade system, and very little sound feedback during fights. Most opponents just stand still until they're attacked. Collision detection is unreliable, with characters often missing hits or floating above the ground. The game also lacks voice acting from the movie's cast, and many levels unfold in complete silence or with looping elevator music. The camera is poorly angled in a way that it frequently obscures enemies or just clips through walls. Charlie's Angels received universally negative reviews and failed to sell in large numbers. It's often cited as one of the most soulless and mechanically broken licensed games released during the 6th console generation.
Hi, my name's Jane. We hardly know each other, but that's about to change. You're going to get to know a lot about me, maybe even more than you imagine. This whole thing's kind of like a blind date.
Released for the 3DO, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties is often labeled a full-motion video game, but in reality, it's a slideshow of still images with awkward narration and minimal interactivity. The game markets itself as a romantic comedy, but the end product is a bizarre mashup of softcore innuendo, fourth wall breaks, and surreal editing. Players follow the story of John, a plumber, and Jane, a businesswoman, as they navigate a series of bizarre scenarios to find love. The gameplay consists of choosing between branching dialogue or action paths, though most choices lead to dead ends or loop back to the main plot. There are no real puzzles or challenges, just static photos with grainy filters and poorly mixed voiceovers.
You're gonna need some help in that department.
What do you mean, help? You saying I ain't man enough for you? I'm just your size.
You won't be after this.
Ooh!
The visuals are made up of low-res snapshots rather than video, and the transitions between scenes are jarring. A narrator frequently interrupts to scold the player or make crude jokes, and several segments include random non sequiturs, like Kung Fu Dream or a boardroom filled with people wearing animal masks. Despite being marketed as an adult experience, the game includes no actual nudity or meaningful adult content, just heavily implied scenarios presented through laughable stills. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties was a commercial and critical failure and remains infamous as a prime example of how not to use FMV technology.
The #1 chart hit from Europe is finally available in the US. Express. Text Crazy 1 for the Polys, a part of the Giant plan. Text Crazy 2 for the Masters, part of the Real Tone plan. To 75555 now.
Released at the peak of the mid-2000s ringtone craze, Crazy Frog Racer attempted to turn the viral character into a kart racing franchise. Developed by Nico Entertainment and released on PlayStation 2 and PC, the game is a low-effort clone of Mario Kart, minus the fun or charm. The gameplay features basic kart racing across a handful of uninspired tracks. Controls are stiff, physics are clunky, and karts feel like they float over the track rather than grip it. Collision often allows racers to phase through obstacles or get stuck in corners. Power-ups are generic, offering little variety or strategic use, and multiplayer is limited to split screen with no online functionality. Races are filled with endless loops of the Crazy Frog theme song and the character's signature high-pitched engine noises. The character roster includes obscure additions like Matilda the Cow and The Drone, suggesting that developers had to invent characters just to fill out the lineup. The visuals are garish, with neon effects and flat environments that strain the eyes more than they entertain. Despite overwhelmingly negative reviews, the game sold well enough in Europe to justify a sequel, which offered only minor improvements. Kool-Aid Man was a promotional tie-in game for the Atari 2600, distributed by sending in proofs of purchase from Kool-Aid products. Developed by Mattel, the game features the titular mascot defending a giant fishbowl of Kool-Aid from creatures called Thirsties. The gameplay is simple. You control Kool-Aid Man as he bounces around the screen, trying to stop the Thirsties from reaching and drinking the liquid. Movement is floaty and imprecise, and there's no actual jumping or attacking, just directional movement. Once you touch a Thirsty, they vanish. As the game progresses, more Thirsties spawn and move faster, eventually overwhelming the player due to sluggish controls and the lack of meaningful strategy. There's minimal variety in levels, no progression system, and no music beyond a few sound effects. Despite being a game for kids, it offers little instruction and punishes players with a steep difficulty spike after just a few rounds. The visuals are colorful for the era, but basic even by 2600 standards. Because it wasn't sold in stores, Kool-Aid Man didn't generate traditional sales data. Zelda: The Wand of Gamelon was one of 3 Legend of Zelda games released for the Philips CDI, a multimedia console never intended for gaming. Nintendo had granted Philips limited rights to use its characters as part of a failed hardware partnership, and the result was a set of games developed without Nintendo's oversight. In Wand of Gamelon, players control Zelda in a side-scrolling action platformer, but the gameplay is close to broken. Hit detection is inconsistent, and combat is clumsy due to the stiff animations and unresponsive controls. The inventory and item use system is confusing with frequent glitches, and level layouts are unintuitive and filled with cheap deaths. The game also features notoriously bad animated cutscenes produced by a Russian animation studio on a tight budget. Characters move awkwardly, lip syncing is off, and the voice acting is amateurish at best. These cutscenes have been immortalized thanks to the subgenre of YouTube they helped create.
After you've scrubbed all the floors in Hyrule, then after you've scrubbed all the floors in Gamelon, then after you've scrubbed all of me, then after you've rubbed oil on my penis, then you can rub my dick, then you can eat shit, then you can take my boy to dinner.
Great!
Players must repeatedly exit and re-enter areas to trigger events, and some progress paths are locked unless specific NPC dialogue has been seen. Although it was a commercial failure, Wand of Gamelon has gained infamy for being a Nintendo-branded disaster released without Nintendo's involvement. Hong Kong 97 is an unlicensed game developed by Japanese journalist Kolun Kurosawa and released on bootleg Super Famicom cartridges It was created in a matter of days using stolen assets, public domain music, and shock value writing, intentionally designed to mock both game development and the industry itself. The game features Chin, a supposed relative of Bruce Lee, tasked with killing all 1.2 billion communists in China, and a zombified version of Chairman Mao. The player moves left or right, while enemies endlessly flood the screen. There's no real animation or level design, just looping enemy sprites and an instant game over if you're touched once. Graphics are jarring collages of real-world imagery, including photos of bodies and political leaders. The soundtrack is a loud, looping sample of I Love Beijing Tiananmen, creating a harsh, repetitive audio experience that cannot be turned off. There's no ending, no scoring system, and no progression, just a constant loop until you die. It's unclear how many physical copies are made, but ROMs circulated online in the early 2000s, turning it into a cult curiosity. Hong Kong 97 isn't just broken, it's a deliberately provocative, low-effort title that's become a symbol of shock value gaming. Originally created as a free holiday novelty game by Endstorm, Elf Bowling was a simple gag where Santa Claus bowls over obnoxious elves who mocked the player. It became a viral office hit in the late 90s, shared via email as a downloadable EXE. The gameplay was minimal, drag, aim, and release, with a few elf taunts and jokes thrown in. While the PC version was never meant to be taken seriously, the game was later ported to the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS in 2005. That's when it became a punchline. The port was a direct, low-quality copy of the freeware version with no meaningful upgrades to graphics or mechanics. The DS version added touchscreen controls, but they were clunky and offered no precision or responsiveness. Reviewers criticized it for having the depth of a flash game and being sold at retail for full price. The game had bugs, frame rate issues, and reused the same elf voice clips to the point of irritation. Attempts to stretch the game with added minigames only made it feel more padded and unnecessary. IGN gave the DS version a 1.5 out of 10, calling it one of the worst games ever released on the platform.
You've played simulators before. We all have. Tanks, planes, race cars, submarines, hedgehogs. Heck, Absolutes even put out a few of them themselves. But let's face it, how many of us are ever actually going to use these valuable skills in our everyday lives?
Desert Bus was one of several satirical games in Penn and Teller's Smoke and Mirrors, a never-released Sega CD collection designed to prank or frustrate players. Unlike typical driving games, Desert Bus tasks players with a single, mind-numbing objective: drive a bus from Tucson, Arizona to Las Vegas in real time. The journey takes 8 continuous hours of driving in a perfectly straight line. There are no passengers, no music, no scenery changes, and no gameplay mechanics beyond steering slightly to the left to keep from veering off-road. If you stop or crash, you're towed back to the starting point in real time. Upon completion, you earn 1 point and then the option to turn around and drive back. There is no end screen, no high score table, and no pause feature. The game was created to mock politicians who claimed video games needed to be more realistic and non-violent. Though the game was never officially released due to the Sega CD's cancellation, Desert Bus gained notoriety years later after ROMs leaked. It has since become the centerpiece of Desert Bus for Hope, a charity event where players stream the game to raise money for children's hospitals. Desert Bus is deliberately bad, a non-game designed to be as boring as possible, and in that, it succeeds completely. Directed by Japanese comedian and actor Beat Takeshi, Takeshi's Challenge is an intentionally absurd and punishing Famicom game that openly mocks video game logic and player expectations. Published by Taito, it drops players into the role of a salaryman who quits his job, divorces his wife, joins the Yakuza, and searches for treasure, all within the span of a few chaotic screens. The game offers almost no guidance. It punishes players for doing normal things, like talking to NPCs, picking the wrong menu option, or pressing buttons at the wrong time. One instance requires the player to not touch the controller for an hour to trigger progress. Another demands singing into the Famicom microphone, a feature rarely used in other games. Combat is clumsy, with one-hit deaths and no recovery time. Many areas are inaccessible unless players follow obscure, often undocumented steps. Some screens serve no purpose, while others are essential but indistinguishable. Despite its nonsensical design, the game was a commercial success in Japan, likely due to Takeshi's popularity at the time, but it quickly gained a reputation as one of the most hostile, player-unfriendly games ever released. An interactive prank disguised as a traditional RPG. In Japan, the term kusoge, literally shitty game, is used to describe games so poorly made or bizarre that they achieve cult status. Entire communities are dedicated to tracking down these titles, often celebrating them for their failure as much as their novelty. One standout kusoge is I'm Sorry, an arcade game developed by Corland and Sega. Players control a caricature of Japanese Prime Minister Kakuei Tanaka, collecting gold while dodging enemies like Michael Jackson, Madonna, and sumo wrestlers. The game was a satirical jab at political corruption, but the execution is surreal and nonsensical. Levels loop endlessly with minimal variation, and collision detection is loose and unreliable. Other infamous kusoge include Iki, a top-down rebellion game with terrible hitboxes and repetitive enemy waves. Chubby Cherub, a bizarre side-scroller where you float through the air, eating food and dodging aggressive dogs for no clear reason. Kusoge titles aren't always broken. Some work mechanically, but are baffling in concept, tone, or pacing. What unites them is their unintentional absurdity and their ability to confuse even seasoned players. Sad Satan is an infamous horror game that gained notoriety after being featured on the now defunct YouTube channel Obscure Horror Corner in 2015. The creator claimed to have found the game via a link on the dark web and uploaded eerie gameplay footage that went viral. In the game, the player walks through narrow, dimly lit hallways while distorted sound clips play in the background, including reversed music, political speeches, and interviews with murderers. Occasionally, disturbing images flash on screen, mutilated faces, Nazi propaganda, and blurred photos of children. The game has no objectives, enemies, or scoring, only an escalating sense of unease and confusion. Viewers immediately questioned its authenticity. The Tor link provided by the channel was invalid, and those who found alternative versions online reported either non-functional copies or disturbing edits filled with explicit or illegal content. This fueled speculation that the original version either never existed or was heavily staged for shock value. The channel Obscure Horror Corner vanished soon after posting the final video, adding to the mystery. Whether Sad Satan was an elaborate ARG, a hoax, or something more, it remains a disturbing symbol of the deep internet. Released by TradeWest for the NES in 1989, Taboo: The Sixth Sense isn't really a game, it's a tarot card simulator, which made it stand out as one of the most bizarre titles for the console. It was rated for entertainment only, but came with a warning that it could predict your future, including your death date. Players enter their name, birth date, and gender, and the game generates a full tarot reading, complete with cryptic card descriptions and moody synth music. There are no enemies, objectives, or player agency beyond pressing start. After the reading, the game even offers lucky numbers. The tone is unsettling. It features a black screen with drifting stars, slow ominous music, and cryptic messages like, "You will suffer betrayal," or "You must give something up." Some versions even used religious or death-themed imagery, which led to it being banned in some households and falsely rumored to be recalled. The game gained a cult following for its weirdness and became the subject of urban legends, some claiming it cursed their console or gave eerily accurate readings. Some believe the game was haunted, especially due to its unusually serious tone for an NES title marketed in toy aisles. Taboo is often cited as the strangest official NES release, a psychological oddity remembered more for its creepy aura than its functionality. Revenant was released in 2000 by Cinematics Studios and published by Eidos Interactive, aiming to be a stylish mix of action RPG and hack-and-slash combat, but it was largely buried due to its own technical issues and uneven design. Players take on the role of Locke, a resurrected warrior navigating a dark fantasy world. The game featured promising ideas, real-time combat, spell combos, inventory management, and a moody, isometric world reminiscent of Diablo. The final product was riddled with bugs, game crashes, and save file corruption was frequent, with some players unable to complete quests due to scripting errors that broke progression. Combat looked fast-paced on the surface, but enemy AI was erratic and controls are clunky. Spellcasting required drawing arcane symbols with the mouse, but the recognition system often failed. Dialogue would sometimes softlock or loop endlessly, and loading times were brutal, some over a minute between screens. Revenant also had a now famous final boss glitch, where the ending cutscene wouldn't trigger unless the player executed a specific attack combo under unusual conditions, something never explained in-game. Despite the cult following and strong concept art, Revenant is remembered as a promising RPG that collapsed under its own ambition and technical instability.
Make your selection now.
Action 52 was a bold and disastrous attempt by Active Enterprises to sell a multi-game cartridge featuring 52 original games on the NES for a retail price of $199.99. The box promised creativity, variety, and innovation. What players got was one of the most broken and unplayable compilations ever released on a console. Most of the 52 games crash, freeze, or fail to load entirely. Several are near identical clones with swapped sprites. Hit detection is erratic, controls are often unresponsive, and some levels are impossible to complete due to broken coding. Ooze crashes on the second screen every time. Streamers features enemies that can't be avoided and glitches that softlock progress. Cheetah Men, the supposed flagship game, was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles knockoff, starring 3 anthropomorphic cheetahs with vague martial arts powers. The game features awful platforming, music that desyncs from gameplay, and a game-breaking bug that prevents players from reaching the 3rd level. Despite all this, Action 52 received a sequel, Cheetah Men 2, which was so broken it wasn't even released. Unlicensed carts later resurfaced, but the game remained unplayable without fan-made patches. Action 52 has since become a legend among collectors, a shining example of what happens when ambition meets total inexperience. It's not just one bad game, it's 52 disasters packed into a single cartridge.